Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? My name's Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me. As always, I got this bubbly in my hand, not sponsored.
Oh, I had a bubbly for the draft at your place.
Oh, you did? I had 4.
That's not surprising.
Totally
but
unsurprising.
I'm not going to lie. It kind of underwhelmed me. But I will say...
You have to drink it cold. That's the first
You have to drink it cold, and it's also one of those, I feel like, acquired tastes, because I don't really like seltzer water.
It takes time.
It's just flavored seltzer water. That's all it is.
Yeah. I mean, even to this day, I'll still have a soda, and, I don't drink soda, but, I'll take a sip of my wife's soda or something stupid, and I'll be like, this is way better than it hurts my soul.
Right.
But anyway, so excited. We are officially into the offseason here. We got a lot of stuff to get to over the coming weeks. We're going to do consistency stuff, like we said. We're going to do rankings. We're going to do some mocks coming up in the next couple months. A lot of draft research and stuff like that. So Rick and I have got to get up on the times and watch some college football for the next month and a half.
I've seen a little bit. I feel like I've seen maybe...
This quarterback class sounds like it freaking blows.
It's better than last year, though.
Okay, all right.
It's so funny, though, for how many years have we heard 2023 is the year?
Yeah.
And it's basically...
Last year plus.
It's last year plus... it's just different positions. The receiver class isn't the best, but it's got great running backs. And then the quarterbacks are better than last year, but it's not as good as 2021. So it's what are we doing here?
Right.
It's good. It's a good class, but it's not an all-time class. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. But we got a lot of stuff to get to over the next couple weeks and months. And it is very interesting as we pour into these numbers from the 2022 seasons on the consistency stuff, just talking about some of the players that had success, some of the players that didn't have success. There's a bunch of wide receivers here that you could look at consistency-wise that had success, that were just a little bit weird in terms of their percentages and stuff like that. So we'll dive into the wide receiver stuff. Before we do that, check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platforms, please leave a review. Share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notices, like and comment down below any questions you may have for us. Us. All right, so we talked about all the details of the consistency stuff on Thursday's show. For wide receivers, numbers are obviously a little bit different. We're going to base this on half PPR scoring. So basically, if you scored 8 or less points, you busted out. You sucked. You were terrible. If you scored 8 to 13 fantasy points, we'll round up 8 to 14 fantasy points. You had a good game.
Yep.
Decent game. And you really hit, you were a breakout superstar for the week. You got 14 or more points. So
now, I do want to say, this is probably going to be the least accurate, I feel like, because standard for receiver is basically just touchdowns. Because catches
but this isn't,
in PPR leagues,
you have to on that article, you have to click into the thing, and it tells you what.
Oh, you can do PPR?
No, it's based on half PPR. So standard scoring on Fantasy Pros is half PPR now.
Oh, it is.
Yes. So
this is half PPR.
When they say
well, that's better.
Scoring, yeah, I hate half PPR.
Are you sure? Because
it's low, but remember, get an extra half point in there.
I don't know, man, because this is 8 points.
That's a bust.
I know. All right, but either way, it's still not going to be like a PPR league. For example, we'll talk about this player, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is pretty low on this list. And that's because the guy gets 10 catches a game. But he might not put up huge yardage or have 2 or 3 touchdown games, but he'll get you 7 to 10 catches every game. So his PPR numbers are much better. And you'll notice some of the guys that are really well on this list are guys that make big plays and guys that get touchdowns.
Yep.
So, but yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's jump into some of the stuff. Some of the top players that we had this year: Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill. I think they were wide receiver 1 and 2. Is that correct?
I don't know if Hill was.
I think Hill was up there
in PPR. I can go check.
Fantasy leaders, wide receivers. Why are we only showing week 1? What are you doing, Fantasy Pros?
Let me see if I can pull it up.
Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill were the top.
So Hill was 3rd.
So yeah, for those 3 guys, obviously they were the top 3 in fantasy football. In terms of Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, they were at 71, 76. I would say 70 or above.
Hill was 2nd, actually, in PPR.
Oh.
I don't know if you were looking at the rate.
I was looking at half PPR. Just to reflect the same numbers.
All right, that's fair.
So I would say 70% or above is really, really, really good for wide receivers in quality or great performances. And so you want to see that from a wide receiver in order for them to be in the top 3 to 5 at the wide receiver position. You see that with Justin Jefferson, who gets 12, quality or great games, which, like we talked about, is 9.
Yeah,
8 or 9.
He had 9 great ones.
Yeah. Hold on a second. Was it 9 great ones? Yeah.
Yep.
So he had, basically 12 quality or great games, which is 71% of the time. He was winning you weeks, like around 50 to 60% of the time. So he was really good. And then you got Tyreek Hill. He was a little bit less in terms of the great games, in terms of the like breakout games, but he was fantastic for PPR. So I feel like these numbers, like Rick said, would weight a little bit more towards great, because he was targeted a lot, but he was still fantastic in fantasy football, with 76% of the time being quality or great. And then the other guy that was also, I'll just mention guys that were in the 70s at this point. Another guy that was in the 70s was 76, that tires Tyreek Hill at the top. A.J. Brown, 13 quality or great games, tying Tyreek Hill. He had 5 quality games, 6 great games. He was fantastic this year, and he was up there. So he was winning you weeks at times. He was, sitting there straight at times. He only had 4 bust games, so A.J. Brown was really good as well. And I believe that's the only other guy that had 70%.
Yeah, those are the only 3. In half PPR, A.J. Brown was wide receiver 5, too. And PPR, he was wide receiver 6. But, big plays, touchdowns. So it's actually kind of impressive because of how consistent he was, though. He didn't really have games that disappointed you at all. Only 4 with less than 8.5 PPR. So that's really solid. He was a true wide receiver 1 this year. Yeah.
So I would say, and then the other guy that was in the top 3 that I thought was very interesting was Devontae Adams. He had 7 great games, so he was fantastic. He only had 10 quality or great games, and he did bust 7 times. And that was just on par with the Raiders. Like, there were games where he would go off, and then there were games where he would just kind of fall apart. And so only 59% of the time he was having, a game where he had, 9 or more fantasy points, 8 or 9 more fantasy points. And to me, it's like, when you look at Devontae Adams, like, you kind of anticipate a little bit more than that. Like, if you drafted him, top 3, but he was still fantastic for you if you had him. You weren't really like it hurt those 7 like bad games, but it's all right if he has his, his huge performances to, couple with that.
Right. Yeah. He was solid, but it kind of shows you some busts. But I mean, if you're getting, monster weeks, then it doesn't really matter if he gives you like a 7-point stinker after he gets like 30. I don't really know if it does, but yeah, so he was solid. You look at guys like Diggs and Chase, obviously great receivers, and had great seasons, very consistent. If Diggs, a lot of those bad games came in the playoffs, fantasy playoffs. I think his 2 of the 3 fantasy playoff games, it was PPR scoring, so it would be different, but I think he scored under like 12 points in those games, which were probably bust games in half PPR, or at least quality games. So he was someone that almost had a monster year, but the end kind of screwed it up. And then Chase I thought Chase would be a little higher because he did miss some time. He only had 8, but only 62%. So he did have 5 games with less than 8 points, which is interesting to me. T. Higgins, his teammate, had a higher percent. And someone who I think some people were disappointed with. I know the person in our league was disappointed with T. Higgins this year, but he actually had a really good year. He missed 2 games, right? T. Higgins missed 2 games. And then there was also a game where he was active, so it counts as a game played. He had like 2 snaps in the whole game. He was out there for, I think, 1 or 2 snaps the entire game. So he got 0 fantasy points. So if you take that game out, plus the 2 games that he missed, he was a top 10 receiver this year. And I think the consistency number kind of shows that. DeAndre Hopkins was also really good when he came back. So shows he might have something left in the tank there as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anyone else who's like super noticeable to you for positive consistency.
Keenan Allen is in there.
Yeah, 60%. And that this is the half PPR thing because I mean Keenan Allen was very good in PPR as well, but he actually got a lot of touchdowns when he came back. In the second half of the season, he was getting like a touchdown a week, so that makes sense that he was at that. But Keenan Allen actually was just flat out really good when he came back. He was, I think, a top 15 receiver.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bet on that going into next year though.
Yeah.
What about someone who's, their percentage is maybe lower than you thought or where you thought, but
yeah, I mean, obviously we have to, you mentioned the, like I said, these numbers are half PPR. So they're all based on averages and stuff like that. So you take that with a grain of salt. But Amon-Ra with 44%. So he had 7 quality and great performances, 9 poor performances. And so that is actually a really interesting metric considering that early in the season he was going off. Like he was lighting it up. And in PPR, he's ridiculous. Like the amount he gets targeted and the amount he gets catches, like the guy, like if you get 10 passes in half PPR, you get 5 fantasy points. In full PPR, you get 10. So there were weeks where like in full PPR, Amon-Ra was having a really good week and overperforming just based on the receptions. So, I saw him going off in situations with that, but he's not a guy that will break open. Like if you have him in standard or half PPR leagues, like he's not a guy that's going to break open, and have massive performances. He's more of like a slot PPR kind of guy that will just collect a ton of passes and occasionally catch a touchdown. But with that being said, he was still okay. I wanted to pull up where he finished last year in fantasy football.
In half PPR, he was still good. He was wide receiver 8.
Yeah,
but he was closer to like the Amari Coopers, the Devontae Smith, Christian Kirk, Chase because he missed time, Tyler Lockett. He was closer to that tier than he was the CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown. While in PPR, he was right behind those guys. And I think he was actually even ahead of one of them.
What I noticed too, with the time that DeAndre Hopkins had on the field, 62% of the time he had a quality or great performance. So he had 2 great performances, 4 quality performances, which means he had 6 on the season. And then he had 3 poor performances where he scored 8 or less points. So like looking at that, looking at those metrics, it looks like D-Hop is still D-Hop for the most part. If he had played a full gamut of games, which how many games did he play this year? 6, 9. So
he was suspended. I think he's played more because he was suspended the first 6 games of the season.
This one
right?
just has 9 games.
9 games. Okay, yeah.
So, but like he was 67% of the time he was up there with T. Higgins and stuff like that. So the question is going into next year, do you anticipate a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, depending on where he lands and stuff like that, to continue to be a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football? That remains to be seen. Obviously, we need to see landing spot and stuff like that, but he was really good. Did you mention CeeDee?
I briefly brought him up.
Yeah, so CeeDee, interestingly enough, had a bunch of bust games. And I think it's interesting to, like, he had 11 quality or great games, so it wasn't like it absolutely destroyed you. But he finished the season as the wide receiver 6, and you know how I am about CeeDee Lamb. I love CeeDee Lamb. But only, like, usually, like, this, guys like this who aren't as super consistent, you see, jump into the conversation of having like 13 or 14 quality or great games, and then most of them are quality. For him, he had some really great games. He had some, okay games where he scored enough fantasy points for you not to suck. And then he had weeks where he just busted and lost a week for you. And I think the main thing with CeeDee Lamb that's a concern is that Dak Prescott is his quarterback. And it seems as though Dak Prescott, and I hate to hate on Dak because he is a good NFL quarterback. It's just he likes to spread it around. And he'll throw it to Dalton Schultz. He'll throw it to Noah Brown. He'll throw it to anybody who really is open. He doesn't stick to one, receiver, which for NFL, wonderful, great, good for you. But like for fantasy, it kind of blows. So like CeeDee's going to have those situations where I think for fantasy football, he's a top 5-6 guy. He's just going to have weeks where he does burn you, and you're not going to be happy with the performance or happy with the outcome. And I think these numbers, even in half PPR, are accurate because there will be weeks where he gets targeted 14 times and catches 10 passes, and then there'll be weeks where he gets targeted 5 times, catches 3 passes, and you're like, what the heck happened here? So I love CeeDee Lamb, but when you bust 35% of the time, that's not great. He's up there with Devontae Adams busts and different stuff like that. So
I think he was a little better in PPR though. I do think he was a little bit because he was ahead of AJ Brown in PPR.
Yeah, like
points.
Those 1 or
not
2
by
points,
much, but
yeah. So, but we want to see him be a little bit more consistent in terms of his games, because if he was consistent, he would be ahead of AJ Brown. Was he ahead of AJ Brown? I already forgot.
In PPR he was ahead. In half PPR, AJ Brown was ahead.
Yeah. So
they flip flop.
So like I do like if he was more consistent on a week to week basis, I probably take CD over AJ because AJ's not a target horde. Like he's not going to take a million targets from you. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's going to get 7. He's going to crack off a 150-yard touchdown.
150-yard touchdown.
He somehow broke the odds. But anyway, yeah, so it's like, they're two different types of players, but CD should be getting targeted. He's a type of receiver that should be getting targeted 10 times a game, and I don't know why Dallas does not take advantage of that. Metcalf disappointing 53%. That's probably Geno, but he had 8 bust games. So, I mean, it's funny because I was looking at him, I'm like, to me, I think he was better than we thought he was going to be, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I didn't have high expectations with him because of the Geno thing, but
like, now looking at the situation, like I've seen like Metcalf in underdog PPR, he's like a 2nd, 3rd round pick, and I'm like, should we continue drafting Metcalf in that area? So
I mean, he actually was worth it last year in the 4th or 5th round.
Yeah,
but he didn't exceed that spot. I feel like.
Yeah,
like he should probably be a 4th round pick again, and he's good there in the 4th. He's a good wide receiver too.
Yeah,
for fantasy, but I don't think he's a wide receiver 1. And if you're taking a wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round, that's probably a wide receiver 1.
Another guy super interesting way down the list. He played in I think it was 16 games. Tyler Lockett, 56% of the time he had a quality or great performance. Guys around him were like at 40 to 20, so 20 to 40%. Most of those games were just quality games where he was doing okay. But he had an interesting year. He did bust 7 times, but with Geno gone, no expectations. Yeah. I mean, no, not with Geno. With Russ gone,
I was so low on Tyler Lockett. I was completely out. Did not have him in any league.
So he did perform a little bit better. He was up there with the likes of like Devonta Smith, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin in terms of quality and great games together. So, he was fantastic. An interesting guy here, Chris Godwin. I don't know if this is the PPR thing.
This is 100% the PPR thing.
33%. That's
That's because the amount of game. I think this is actually standard. The more I'm looking at it, I don't think it is half PPR, because the amount of games Chris Godwin had,
Myers
like 7 or 8 catches.
Jacoby Myers is at 50% down.
He had some touchdowns though this year.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He doesn't do anything else besides catch 4 touchdowns. I mean,
I think he had 6 this year.
I don't know,
5 or 6, I think. But either way, Chris Godwin has like. He had the amount of games he had like 8 catches. Yeah, Myers had 6 touchdowns. But the amount of games that Chris Godwin would have 8 catches for 60 yards.
Let's qualify this a little bit.
Which would be 6 fantasy points.
Let's just qualify this for a second in half PPR. So I would say top 24 finish at minimum is a quality or great performance, correct?
Probably.
So if you take the average of the top players, right, in fantasy football just on the season, the guy at wide receiver 24, that's Cooper Kupp, so that doesn't count. We're going to scratch him off. Chris Olave, who played a bunch of games, 10. Zay Jones, 9. Gabe Davis, 9. Jacoby Myers, 10. Juju Smith-Schuster, 9. So this is just half PR.
It might be then.
So yeah, it might be 8.
Know.
Whereas let's take a look at the jump to PPR. So around the wide receiver 24, we had 12, 11, 10, 12, 10, 10, 13. So we've just been playing in a different stratosphere.
That's true. But standard,
standard it drops.
It's Olave was 8 points per game, which is still considered quality. So I don't know.
Yeah, after that, wide receiver 26, Chris Godwin, 7.9.
Right.
So either way, it gives you kind of a picture of what's going on.
It still does for at least some of the guys. It's funny, though, because someone who should be good in the spot, Gabe Davis, only 33%.
Yeah. Michael Thomas played 3 games.
Yeah.
67% of the time, quality or great. There you go.
There you go.
There you go, bud. Cooper Kupp going way down, still elite. 5 great games, 3 quality games, 89% of the time, quality or great. He only had 1 bust, so he's going to continue getting a horde of target share. So anybody else that you see that's staring at you?
No, I think that's really it. My boy Jahan Dotson.
Stop.
50%.
Hey, there you go. He's mid. You love Jahan Dotson.
He's a better, I think, real life player than he's fantasy player.
Yeah, definitely. But there you go. Interesting stuff here at the wide receiver position. Running back should even be more confusing. So can't wait for that. But anyway, there's your consistent wide receivers. We're going to talk about consistent running backs and tight ends next week. Be sure to hook up, check it out. We'll talk to you later, guys.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.